Welcome to the Discourse Analyzer AI Toolkit, where articles come alive. You're listening to the audio version of our article. For the full text and an interactive experience, check out the link in the description below. Interact with any selection using our AI assistant to enhance your understanding. Let's explore.
Critics and counterarguments of critical race theory in discourse analysis. Critical race theory, CRT, has been instrumental in examining and challenging the pervasive influence of racial dynamics within societal institutions. Yet, it faces critiques, notably the risk of reinforcing racial essentialism by focusing intensively on race. This concern posits that CRT might unintentionally solidify the idea of race as an intrinsic trait, which could perpetuate stereotypes and undermine the social constructivist intentions of CRT. This analysis explores these critiques, the arguments for the necessity of racial focus in CRT, and how CRT scholars incorporate intersectionality and reflexivity to navigate the delicate balance of addressing race without essentializing it. 1. Critique of essentialism. Critical race theory, CRT, has been a transformative framework in understanding the dynamics of race and racism in various societal domains, including law, education, and discourse analysis. However, it is not without its critics. One significant critique leveled against CRT concerns the risk of reinforcing racial essentialism. This critique suggests that CRT's persistent focus on race might inadvertently endorse the notion that race is a natural, inherent, or essential characteristic of individuals, rather than a socially constructed and historically contingent category. 1. Understanding racial essentialism. Racial essentialism is the idea that racial groups possess underlying and unchanging traits, characteristics, or abilities specific to that group. This concept is problematic because it can lead to stereotyping and justify discriminatory practices by attributing fixed characteristics to people based on their race. Critics argue that by continually centering race as a fundamental category of analysis and identity, CRT might unintentionally perpetuate the idea that race is a defining, immutable characteristic of individuals. 2. Critique of CRT's focus on race. Reification of race. Critics argue that CRT's intense focus on race as a central axis of social analysis and identity politics may reify race, make it more concrete or real than it might otherwise be. By treating race as a primary lens through which all social issues are analyzed, there is a risk that CRT could contribute to the very essentialism it seeks to dismantle. Overshadowing other identities. This critique extends to the concern that CRT's focus on race might overshadow or minimize the importance of other intersecting identities, such as class, gender, sexuality, or disability. While CRT scholars often incorporate intersectionality into their analyses, critics worry that the primacy given to race can dilute the attention given to how these other dimensions of identity also shape experiences of oppression and privilege. Limiting individual agency. Another critique is that an overemphasis on racial identity might limit perceptions of individual agency, portraying individuals primarily as products of their racial identities and experiences. This could diminish the recognition of personal and group agency and variability within racial groups, potentially leading to a deterministic view of behavior based on race. 3. Counterarguments and responses from CRT proponents. Social constructivism. In response to these critiques, proponents of CRT argue that the theory itself is deeply rooted in the understanding that race is a social construct, not a biological reality. CRT scholars emphasize that their focus on race is intended to highlight how racial categories are created and utilized to maintain systemic inequities, not to suggest that these categories have an inherent essence. Necessity of racial analysis. CRT scholars also contend that because racial categorization and racial hierarchies are significant factors in societal organization and inequality, it is crucial to confront and analyze race explicitly in order to dismantle the systems that use race to oppress. They argue that ignoring race or downplaying its significance would fail to address the root causes of racial disparities and injustices. Incorporation of intersectionality. Additionally, many within CRT actively engage with and incorporate intersectionality as a core component of their analysis, addressing the ways in which race intersects with other identities. This approach aims to provide a more nuanced analysis that acknowledges the complexity of individual experiences and avoids essentializing any single identity. The critique of essentialism in CRT highlights the delicate balance required in analyzing race without reifying or essentializing it. This discourse underscores the ongoing need for reflexivity in critical race scholarship, ensuring that race is used as a tool for revealing and dismantling systemic inequalities rather than inadvertently reinforcing them. While these critiques are important to consider, they also foster a deeper and more nuanced engagement with the principles and applications of CRT in discourse analysis and beyond. 2. Debate over methodological approaches. The debate over methodological approaches within critical race theory, CRT, discourse analysis primarily revolves around the use of qualitative versus quantitative methods. Each approach offers distinct advantages and faces unique criticisms, especially when applied to studying race and racism in discourse. This debate reflects broader discussions in social research about the appropriate tools for capturing the complexities of social phenomena, particularly those as nuanced and multifaceted as race and racism. 1. Qualitative approaches in CRT. Strengths. Depth of analysis. Qualitative methods, such as ethnography, interviews, and textual analysis, are prized in CRT for their ability to delve deeply into the subjective experiences and meanings of race and racism. These methods allow researchers to capture the nuanced ways in which race is constructed and experienced in everyday life. Contextual understanding. By focusing on specific contexts and interactions, qualitative research can uncover the dynamics of race and racism as they occur in natural settings, providing rich, detailed insights that are often missed by broader quantitative analyses. Emphasis on voices of marginalized groups. Qualitative research aligns with CRT's commitment to elevating the voices and experiences of marginalized populations, offering a platform for these groups to share their stories and perspectives, which are frequently marginalized in mainstream discourse. Weaknesses, subjectivity and bias. Critics argue that the subjective nature of qualitative methods might introduce biases in interpretation, particularly when researchers' perspectives and identities shape their analysis of racial issues. Generalizability. The findings from qualitative research are often criticized for their lack of generalizability, as studies typically involve smaller, more focused samples that do not necessarily represent broader populations. 2. Quantitative approaches in CRT. Strengths. Generalizability. Quantitative methods, including surveys and statistical analysis, can provide data from larger samples, making it possible to generalize findings to larger populations. This is particularly valuable in policy-related discourse, where understanding broad trends and patterns is crucial. Objectivity. Quantitative research is often viewed as more objective, particularly because it relies less on the subjective interpretations of the researcher. This can lend more credibility in policy debates and discussions that demand empirical evidence. Weaknesses. Lack of depth. While quantitative methods can provide breadth, they often lack the depth to fully explore how race and racism are experienced and understood by individuals. This can lead to an oversimplification of complex racial dynamics. Neglect of contextual and historical factors. Quantitative approaches might fail to account for the historical and contextual factors that shape racial discourse, potentially leading to analyses that overlook the systemic nature of racism. 3. Counterarguments and integrative approaches. Blended methodologies. In response to these debates, some CRT scholars advocate for a methodological pluralism or mixed methods approach, combining both qualitative and quantitative techniques to leverage the strengths of each. This can involve using quantitative methods to identify patterns and trends, while qualitative methods can explore these patterns in depth, providing a more holistic understanding of race and racism in discourse. Methodological rigor. Proponents of both approaches emphasize the need for rigorous methodological execution and reflexivity, acknowledging and actively addressing the researcher's biases and assumptions in the research process. This is particularly crucial in CRT, where the personal and the political are deeply intertwined in the phenomena being studied. The methodological debate in CRT reflects its interdisciplinary nature and the complexity of race as a subject of study. While each approach has its strengths and limitations, the choice of methodology often depends on the specific research questions and the aspects of race and racism that are being investigated. An integrative approach that combines both qualitative and quantitative methods may provide the most comprehensive insights into the multidimensional aspects of race and discourse analysis. Conclusion. While CRT has faced criticism for potentially reifying race, its proponents and scholarly practices demonstrate a robust engagement with these challenges. CRT's foundational belief in race as a social construct is designed to dismantle, not reinforce, inherent racial categorizations. By integrating intersectional approaches and maintaining a reflexive stance, CRT scholars strive to enrich our understanding of race as a dynamic and systemic force in society. This ongoing dialogue about the implications of focusing on race within CRT not only strengthens its theoretical foundations but also ensures its relevance in addressing the complexities of racism today. Advocating for continued scrutiny and adaptation, CRT remains a crucial framework for analyzing and confronting racial injustices in various societal domains. Frequently asked questions. What are the main critiques of critical race theory and discourse analysis? One major critique is that CRT may reinforce racial essentialism by focusing heavily on race, potentially solidifying the concept of race as an intrinsic, defining characteristic of individuals. Critics also argue that CRT's emphasis on race might overshadow other intersecting identities like gender, class, or sexuality. How does CRT address the risk of reinforcing racial essentialism? CRT scholars emphasize that race is a social construct, not a biological reality, and focus on race to expose and dismantle systemic inequalities, not to reinforce them. They use race as a tool to reveal how racial categories and racial hierarchies are historically and socially constructed and maintained. Can CRT's focus on race undermine its own anti-essentialist stance? While there is a risk that intense focus on race could inadvertently reify racial categories, CRT intentionally uses race to critique and challenge these constructs. By analyzing how race operates in various discourses, CRT seeks to deconstruct, rather than reinforce, racial essentialism. What counterarguments do CRT scholars offer against the critique of overshadowing other identities? CRT scholars incorporate intersectionality, a concept introduced by Kimberlé Crenshaw, as a core component of their analyses. This approach examines how various forms of identity and oppression intersect, ensuring that the complexity of individual experiences is acknowledged and explored. How does CRT respond to the critique that it limits individual agency? CRT acknowledges that while social structures influence individual lives, individuals also have agency and the capacity to resist and reshape their circumstances. The theory examines both the constraints imposed by racial categorizations and the ways individuals navigate and challenge these constraints. What methodologies do CRT scholars use to avoid potential biases in their analyses? CRT employs a variety of methodological approaches, including qualitative research methods like interviews, ethnographies, and textual analysis, which allow for a deeper understanding of personal and collective experiences. Scholars are also encouraged to practice reflexivity, constantly reflecting on their own biases and the implications of their research choices. How does CRT ensure its analyses are comprehensive and not solely focused on race? By integrating intersectional analyses, CRT studies explore the interactions between race and other social categories, providing a more nuanced understanding of social issues. This approach helps to avoid a singular focus on race and considers the broader spectrum of social dynamics. What role does reflexivity play in CRT discourse analysis? Reflexivity is critical in CRT, as it requires scholars to critically examine their own perspectives and how their positionality might influence their research. This introspective practice helps mitigate bias and enhances the credibility and depth of their analyses. Are there any practical examples of how CRT has been applied to address racial essentialism? Yes, in education, CRT has been used to critique and reform curricula that perpetuate racial stereotypes. In legal studies, it has informed the analysis of policies and laws that disproportionately affect racial minorities, advocating for legal reforms that recognize and address racial biases. How do CRT scholars balance the critique of racial essentialism with the need to address real-world racial inequalities? CRT scholars balance these concerns by using race as an analytical category to expose injustices while advocating for policies and practices that acknowledge and address the impact of race without assuming it as an inherent or fixed identity. This approach aims to dismantle systemic racism while avoiding the pitfalls of essentialism.